We need your help. Help us help you make this the best podcast possible. We want to hear your thoughts because you may have noticed lately there's been an increase in guests. And we want to know, do you enjoy hearing from our guests? Do you prefer episodes that feature just the Radical Candor team? Maybe you prefer a mix of both. Please let us know what's working, what you'd like to see so that we can create content that matters for you. Go ahead, email us podcast@radicalcandor.com. Can't wait to hear from you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kim Scott. Welcome to the Radical Candor podcast, which you can now get early and ad-free as part of the Radical Candor community.
And I'm Amy Sandler. And Kim, you are so right. If you are not in the Radical Candor community, what are you even doing with your life? The instruction said, ha-ha, light and funny. Was that ha-ha, light and
That
funny?
was ha-ha, light and funny, for
right.
sure.
Doing our best.
It made me laugh.
So go to radicalcandor.com/community podcast right now and sign up. That's one word. And this is a big day for us. We are so excited to welcome Russ Laraway. You heard that right. The very same Russ Laraway back to the pod, a special 2-part episode about the big 3 leadership elements. And then we'll have a follow-up on career conversations. So I can't imagine that you don't know Russ if you're listening to this podcast, but just in case you don't, Russ, you've got 30 years of leadership experience starting as a Marine Corps company commander before founding Pathfinders. And Russ has held management roles at Google and Twitter. I think that is where Russ and Kim teamed up. Am I correct?
Yep, at Google originally.
Originally at Google. And then Russ and Kim co-founded Candor Inc., which is the precursor to our current company, Radical Candor. So Russ has also served as Chief People Officer at Qualtrics. He's been an operating partner at Goodwater Capital. Russ is currently advising and serving on boards of a variety of tech companies, continuing to tackle those pesky leadership and culture challenges that you are so good at. Russ also seems to like the number 7. You've led 700-person teams, managed $700 million businesses, and is the author of, and if anyone's watching, I'm going to hold up the book. Such a great book. When They Win, You Win. Being a Great Manager is Simpler Than You Think. Available wherever books are sold. Welcome back, Russ.
Thanks. I am so stoked to be back.
Been looking forward to this conversation for weeks.
All right.
Weeks. All right. Yeah, we're so excited. And Russ, we did have you back in 2022, which we were just talking about, felt like about 20 years ago. Your book, When They Win, You Win, was just coming out. We're going to put that episode in the show notes. I also wanted to highlight one of the things people love so much from your content that was also in Radical Candor is career conversations. We're going to follow up with that episode next week. This episode, we're going to talk with Russ about what you call the big 3 elements of leadership: direction, coaching, and career. And I think just like Kim, you've got this remarkable ability to really simplify and clarify complex ideas. And so these big 3 elements of leadership are a really coherent approach that can measurably and predictably help folks deliver more engaged employees and get better results. So let's start there. Tell us more about direction, coaching, and career.
Yeah. Well, it's, that framework actually starts with you guys, believe it or not, with you all. And the origin story of that thinking was when Kim and I were working together. I was on the phone with all of our prospects. We couldn't keep them away, and so I would just pace on top of the Flintstones building roof, and I would take all these calls. And the very first question I would ask everyone was some discovery question about how we can be helpful. And I was looking for them to say some words that led me to believe that the stuff we were doing at the time, Radical Candor, could be helpful. And so so when I would ask them, what's the problem you're trying to solve? I don't know, hundreds of companies said some version of, I've got it much tighter than maybe they all would have said it. They would say, we have an engagement problem related to low manager skill. And I would then out of mostly curiosity, ask, what's the nature of the skill gap? And the reality is that out of hundreds of calls, if you were to construct a word cloud around the skill gaps that they communicated, the three biggest words by a mile were direction, coaching, and career, helping people with their careers. And so, anyway, that's interesting. It's not enough. And when I got to Qualtrics, I was lucky to have a role and a team, both that worked for me and that I worked for, that were really open to us studying whether those were real. Just because 500 companies said it doesn't mean it's real. And so we were able to take that theory and we were able to test. Now, direction, coaching, career are not particularly testable. They're abstraction. We were able to test more specific behaviors underneath each of those. And we were actually able to measure by a statistical regression the extent to which each of those 12 or so behaviors changed employee engagement, which is crucially important 30-year-old IO psychological measurement that many people were far too inclined to toss aside, and business outcomes, which is what we're all really at work to drive. And so then we ended up writing a book that tells you in part one about how we got to that stuff, how we did that work. But parts 2, 3, and 4 are sort of the steps of the why, and parts 2, 3, and 4 are sort of the how. What does it mean? What is how to do direction? How to coach? How to have career conversations? And so that's how we got there with the big three.
But you really wrote the book. I mean, you wrote the book.
I did.
That was
true.
you.
That's
I. I'm gonna.
It says it
usually
right
we encourage
here.
people to say we, but Russ wrote the book.
Yeah.
You wrote
So
the book.
When I say we, first of all, this audience is really important on this podcast. But there's also an audience that don't listen to my appearances anymore. But the people who did the real work, like I can't do this math that these people. I mean, this was like complicated statistical analysis. Like Will and Alexis, they did the heavy lifting that gave us these answers. So
yeah.
So when I say we, I've got a couple groups there.
Some people help you with the math.
Yeah, and look, if Chris Beckstead at Qualtrics didn't say green light on writing about us in your book, it would never happen. There's just a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of we around.
Around the Qualtrics.
I'm not just being falsely humble.
We will dig into direction, coaching, and career. And in fact, we'll also do the career conversations in our next episode. But I would be remiss if I did not backpedal a little bit and have a conversation about the Flintstones house.
This was one of my favorite things that I did at Candor Inc. So we had an office and they sold the office out from under us. So we had to look for a new office. And the engineers lived up in San Francisco and I lived down in Los Altos, and Russ kind of lived in the middle of those two. And so I stayed up very late one night looking on the map of the Bay Area. What's exactly equidistant? And I kind of expanded the map. And one of the things almost perfectly equidistant between San Francisco and Los Altos was what's known as the Flintstone House. And you can Google it, but it is this bulbous orange and purple building.
It was orange and purple? Is that where the love affair started?
There's so many things to love about this house. Also in the kitchen in the house, there are villi, like little, it's like you're inside a stomach. I mean, this house, somebody had a lot of fun with this house. I think they made it by blowing up balloons and pouring some material over the balloons. Anyway, that is what it looks like. It looks like something out of the Flintstones. And so I know I've always driven by. You can see it from 280. So I've driven by it probably a million times. And I was like, I wonder if it's for rent. And I looked it up and it was for sale. And I thought, well, that means nobody's living there. And so I called the person selling it and asked if we could rent it. And we did.
Yeah.
It was really fun.
I can connect Flintstones back to someone who you work with right now, Dan Green.
Oh, do tell.
And it's expedient story, which is I would do phone calls on the roof. There was a sliding door. You could go upstairs, walk out the sliding door, and step on the roof. And I got thousands of steps every day, and was randomly catching up with Dan one day. All of this was unplanned. He was driving up 280, and he said, "Dude, are you on the roof talking to me right now? He could see me pacing I don't know if smoke was coming off my shoes or what, but that one, I couldn't stop laughing. I'd end the call. I was laughing so hard because
Well-
he drove past me. I think he was driving a Tesla back then, and his
Yeah.
Tesla, and
That is
he
really
saw me
funny.
pacing the roof. So Flintstones House, what a fun chapter.
That was not part of my. I was not driving employee engagement. That doesn't fall under direction, coaching, or career. But it was a lot of fun to
Well,
be.
I just want to acknowledge, so Dan is our chief revenue officer. We will check the story as well as the current vehicle that's being driven. You have so many good sound bites of how to actually put this stuff into practice. So let me first of all give a sentence summary of direction. Let you see if that's actually accurate, and then how we can put this into practice. So I have a definition of direction. Good managers ensure that every member of their team understands exactly what is expected and when it is expected.
That's very accurate.
It's a quote from your book.
I think I wrote that. So I love that. That is so smart.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever heard it. But you know what's funny about direction that I've learned is, so first of all, you said something that is, you couldn't have paid me a bigger compliment, Amy. The word simple. Yeah, a phrase I've stolen from Kim over the years, simple, not easy. I think a lot of people, when they hear what our extremely rigorous research ultimately leads to direction coaching career, I do think a lot of people, they would never do this to my face, but I think a lot of people go, well, duh, isn't that all so obvious? If we're obvious, we wouldn't have done the research. And so, but what's fascinating about it is the one that people are the most likely to give me a duh face on is direction. And the key word in that little sentence you gave is ensure, and then exactly what is expected and when it's expected by. What I've learned over the years is a very large percentage of managers believe that they have been clear about what is expected, and a very large number of their employees do not agree. And so what I was hoping to do through framework is to sort of force folks, if you follow there's a 4-part framework in the book. If you follow that and just follow some of the basic rules around that, you have a very high percentage chance of making absolutely certain your team is crystal clear on exactly what is expected, when is expected by. And by the way, the most important thing you need to do, this comes back in coaching, the most important thing you need to do is the last part of the framework, which is subtract, 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 until you get down to this tiny number of things that are expected. And ideally, what is expected has been collaboratively developed with your team. You think about just those two things. Subtract, like aggressively subtract. If the manager doesn't help people subtract work, who will? And create the expectations collaboratively with your team. Just those two things dramatically increase the chances that your employees will be clear on what is expected of them. And then you have to dot the I and make sure you're clear about when it's expected by.
And I think what's so interesting about what you said, Russ, is that if you as the leader of a team ask your team to set the goals, then your job becomes telling them to do less rather than telling them to do more. And that does flip everything on its head, doesn't it?
It does.
So why don't more leaders do that?
Well, I think, first of all, if you think about that, that's what does that require? That requires the leader to have some vulnerability, some humility. It requires the leader to believe their employees' perspectives are worth something. I think a lot of managers have some of these things. What's probably mostly missing, though, isn't those three things. What's probably mostly missing is the consciousness that you should do it that way.
Yeah.
Nobody tells you're told you're in charge. Like one of the worst phrases that gets, I'm in charge.
You're not in charge, and nor are you the decider.
And by the way, the phrase that I hear all the time that is now, I'm going to say it in a way, and it's going to also forever grate on you, is when people say, my team, and my team. It's their team too. Like that is
our
maybe
team.
The most important insight is it's not my team, my team. Well, my team. People can't wait to say that phrase because they get to communicate they're a manager, and that's so cool. So I just think there's not consciousness that, if I actually ask my employees, Peter Drucker said this in 19 whatever. that people are far more likely to follow a course in action through enthusiastically if they've had a say in creating it. It's obvious to you. It's obvious to me. It is decidedly not obvious to most managers out in the world because nobody ever told them they should do that. It's
Yeah.
probably the
Yeah.
simplest version.
And so I think what you're talking about when you talk about direction, I mean, I'm going to boil it down, and you tell me why I'm wrong. Is what is goal setting, like or what we used to call at Google OKRs? Is that wrong or right?
No, it's right. There's 4 parts. That's the third part.
Okay,
The
what's the first?
first 2 parts are long term, purpose and
Mhm.
vision. The
Mhm.
second 2 parts are short term, quarterly-ish goal setting. I'm fine with half a quarter. I'm fine with 2 quarters. Like, it doesn't really matter, but quarterly
Yeah.
goal setting. And then actually as important as goal setting is weekly prioritization,
Mhm.
deciding what work you will do and not do each week in support of those goals.
Mhm.
Those goals should measurably be able to ladder up to your vision, which transpires over usually a 3-year period. And your
Mhm.
vision is always a function of your purpose. And so it's a parent-child relationship all the way down to what are we going to do each week. The stand-up is a great example.
Yeah.
But yes, the pivotal idea, Kim, is the quarterly-ish goal setting, but it can't live relevantly, in my opinion, without a clear sense of what it ladders up to over time, the vision.
Yeah.
And it's not particularly useful if we don't do the hard work every week of deciding what we're going to work on in support of that goal.
Yeah.
So I think on either side of it, there's a lot that matters.
So vision, what was number 2?
Purpose, longest in duration.
Okay, purpose.
Vision is next, shortest in duration. Those expire more often than purpose does.
Mhm.
Then extremely short in duration is quarterly is your goal setting.
Mhm.
And then weekly expressions of work I call prioritizate your priorities.
Yeah.
I've stolen the word priorities because, I mean, are your quarterly goals a priority? Yeah, of course they are. But we have a word for that. Quarterly goals. Is your
Yeah.
vision a priority? Yeah, it is. But we have a word for that. It's called vision. So I stole that word, the second most misused word in business, priority, to mean definitionally your daily or weekly chunks of work that support quarterly
Yeah.
goals.
Okay, so what is the first most misused?
Strategic.
A strategic.
Strategic, strategy. The way that word gets abused, I can't even count them all. But
Yeah.
And then priority.
Let me ask, when you talked about, you delineated between kind of long term and short term. So we're recording this kind of at the end of 2024. This will come out in 2025. So if I'm a manager listening to this podcast and I don't really know what is our teams, just to use that frame, purpose and vision, like where do I get started with crafting that?
Yeah, first of all, good question. Because I am a big believer that purpose and vision are critical hygiene for every team. It's not just something, name the luminary that leaps to your mind first does. It's not just something that the president should do. It's not just something that Martin Luther King should do. It's actually, in my opinion, critical hygiene for you and your team. So how do you get started? I can just tell you how I've done it. And by the way, you will be pulling people along silently kicking and screaming. They'll be going, "This is great, boss. I can't wait." And nobody wants to do this work.
Everybody's going to think it's a waste of time.
And then when you're done, you become, in a good way, a Catholic priest because everyone confesses to you their sins of skepticism. I thought this was going to suck, but I'm so glad we did it. And what's most important about purpose and vision together, and I'll get to your answer, Amy, is they are the invisible leader that help guide people's work and behaviors when there's no direct in the moment guidance available, which just happens. That's their main purpose. And if they get used a couple times a year, realistically, for someone along those lines, they're worth it. So let me tell you how I've done it. Collaboratively with my team. So I'll tell you, when I was chief people officer at Qualtrics, I thought we needed a clear vision and I thought we needed a clear purpose. I had some ideas about why we mattered, purpose. I had some ideas about what our vision might be. So I took my team offsite, actually brought them to my home, and I did a number of things, but I made sure they understood so we could skip all the semantics of purpose, vision, mission. I made sure they understand definitionally what each thing was by helping them understand what question we're trying to answer. With purpose, we're trying to answer the question of why do we exist? With vision, we are trying to answer the question is tangibly, what hill are we trying to climb? Super important. If you think about where hills are, they are always around other hills. And so it's not sufficient to talk about, there's a common hill we're trying to climb. You have to be really clear about which one. And so anyway, we all show up with a common definition. We have a little agenda. I break people down into groups of 2. Usually try to put people together who didn't work together, who are maybe having a little conflict in the workplace. And they get rid of that real quick. I send them away with those guardrails, and I have everyone come back to the table after, call it 90 minutes, I don't remember, and say, what's your purpose statement? As you would imagine, each one's was a little biased toward the work that they're part of the function, right? It's okay. Really important. And everyone hears all the different views on, by the way, what everyone thought was so obvious. And now we've got, 12 people, 6 different views. And then we talk it through. We try to rationalize it. Some ground rules for that. You're not trying to win. We're trying to get to the best answer, blah, blah, blah. And then I observe and I see who kind of seem to get the exercise the best / who has the most energy. And then what I ask them to do is to take everyone's input and craft an iterative prototype that I will ultimately sort of refine and improve and publish. Did that for both purpose and vision. And that's how we arrived. I published them. I had an internal page, published them. Whenever a new hire came to the teams, first thing I went over with them, here's why we exist. And here's what we're trying to get done over the next 2-3 years. So that's kind of how we did it in collaboration with the team. And every single time what the team came up with was pretty different than my sort of, idea going in. And it was
So
way
did you
better.
actually go into those ideas with your own kind of in the back of your mind, here's what I think, what's on my mind for purpose and vision, and I'll see how it maps up? Or did you kind of give that up after doing this a while?
Yeah, was it the first part? Yes, it's just inevitable, right? If you think this is important, it's on my mind. I'm trying to when should I get the team together? When's the right time to do this? And I had my own kind of ideas, which, by the way, would drive how I'd behave. Right now in my life, I say all the time, my purpose is just to be helpful. That's it. That's all I'm doing. And so I'm just that way. But it wasn't about matching up. I did go in very confident the team would come up with something better than what was banging around in my mind. So I did have sort of an idea, but I was really careful never to bias the team toward what I wanted or what I was thinking, because you know how that just frames everything toward your idea. And who knows if we'll get a better answer or not if you frame everybody.
And so what was your purpose?
Yeah, the purpose was a little wordy. I think the vision was better if we focus on one of the two. The purpose ended up being about really enabling an organization through the manager. But the vision was much more interesting. We had Qualtrics itself had a 2 or 3 year vision, probably 2, that was built around some pretty specific business goals. And in fact was built around a pretty detailed operating plan that had a revenue expression and a cost expression. That cost was mostly headcount. So we had an implied revenue per head plan pretty much by year for 2-3 years. I thought ultimately where we landed was that our team, if we did a great job, we would improve Qualtrics revenue per head from what was planned to something different. Because by affecting the employee experience, remember, your employees are the ones who deliver the results, nobody else. The managers create or destroy circumstances under which people can do their best work. Usually they destroy unintentionally. How do we teach them to create? And senior management's job in that leadership context is to create a system by which we could be reasonably assured all the managers, or the managers on average, are behaving in a way that creates those circumstances. So if we did that well, and we made sure each employee experience was curated mostly through their point of contact into the organization, the manager, you would expect revenue per head to be higher than what has been planned. And so our vision was actually ultimately a incremental revenue per head measurement on top of what had been planned in the company's operating plan.
That's amazing, because not many HR departments sign up for a revenue goal.
Nobody wants that smoke.
Yeah. So question for you, like if let's go back to our time at Google. Google's, I guess, mission was to organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful, correct?
Yep.
And what would you have said the vision was when we were there?
I don't know that we had one, really. Or maybe Larry and Sergey thought that mission statement served as both. That purpose drove, that mission purpose, those to me, by the way, are synonymous. A lot of people think it's important to differentiate them.
Yes.
I don't. But I did in the book, I actually grabbed some what I thought were exemplary statements of each kind. And my lead candidate for purpose is organize the world's information. I mean, it's so incredible.
So clear.
If you think about the purchase of Keyhole,
Yeah.
which became Google Earth, which became the satellite view of Google Maps, one of the most important consumer products in the world. You think about Gmail, it made no sense. You're a search company.
Yeah.
No, we're not.
Yeah.
We organize the world's,
Yeah.
And on. Like during our time, we were buying and building, and it always was just so
It
aligned
tied
and
back to
big.
that. Yeah, it was
Yeah, it always tied
incredible.
back.
And Kim, you
actually.
said it pretty quick. So can you just repeat it again for folks who the
Yeah,
second
it-
half?
We should do it together, by the way.
Yeah,
We-
this is a little
It
test.
was almost like a prayer. Like
Yeah.
everybody who worked there knew it.
Want to try?
Yeah, let's do it.
1, 2, 3.
To
Organize
the
all the world's
information.
make it
universally accessible and useful. We just had some messed up prepositions. But
yes, exactly.
Accessible
all
and
the world's
all the world's information, and it was
Make it
accessible.
universally accessible. and
Universally
useful.
accessible.
Universally was
Every
really
word really
important. Yeah.
mattered there.
Every word really mattered. I think at AdSense, I mean, as it turned out, this was this was completely aspirational. I was going to say complete bullshit, but the reality didn't line up with the purpose. But I used to say, I don't know if you remember this, that AdSense's purpose was to fund creativity a nickel at a time.
Yeah,
and that was aspirational. I think we didn't quite pull that off, but that was at least my aspiration.
I guarantee we did pull that off. There was a lot of that, and then there was a lot of junk, and so it was a really fascinating business. But
I mean, in the end, AdSense didn't. If you were going to write a novel, AdSense was not going to help you make any money. If you were going to publish a serious, analytical magazine, AdSense wasn't going to help. So it funded certain kinds of. If you were going to create Ask the Dentist, it was awesome, or Ask the Builder, then it really did fund your creativity a nickel at a time to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. But anyway, so that was like the purpose. And then I think every year we had what I would call a vision, but I wonder if you would. Like one year was the year of operational efficiency. One year was the year of there was the year of operational efficiency. There was the year of driving revenue, proactive, those were kind of visions.
Yeah.
And then the team really wrote at once you and Scott told me, Kim, it's not your job to write the OKRs. It's the team's job. It really does need to be more bottoms up. Then the team really did do the bottoms up goals.
Yeah, those count. I think a good vision statement usually has two attributes: a measurable outcome. Actually, a lot of people, or binary. I'll give you a couple examples, and then a time horizon. Usually, especially in an operating environment like ours. And so we had for sure the time horizon, the year of. And I am confident we had some sort of view on what
we had a
operational
number
efficiency meant by the end of the year. Yeah, with Scott around, we would always.
Yeah.
My two favorite vision statements, by the way, they break this rule a little bit, but not really. It's no longer Microsoft's, but their mid '80s vision statement of computer in every desktop and in every home.
Yeah,
that was bonkers.
Yeah,
and that is, if you think about it, that is pretty measurable. And there was never a time hack, and so that vision served them for a very long time. The other one that I loved, it was Nike's old one, which was Crush Adidas. And the reason I like it is because, it's probably illegal in terms of like thinking about monopoly power. But that aside, I like it because what I know for a fact is behind it, it was defined by market share chain.
Yeah.
But it's a great, easily memorable phrase. And it doesn't, a good purpose or vision statement, it doesn't have to be easy and memorable. That's handy if you can pull that off. It has to be precise first. But I love that because Crush Adidas, and then they knew underneath they had very specific market share goals by year.
Yeah.
So very, very satisfactory kind of visionary thinking by them.
Yeah, actually, early on, one of our visions was squash Yahoo Publisher Network like a bug, I think.
Awesome.
Remember you were talking about violent language in the workplace.
I hadn't heard about nonviolent language. Okay, so that's really helpful. And I want to confess, like, I'm so glad that you gathered some data, because when I sat down to write Radical Candor, somebody gave me this book, The Ambiguities of Experience by James March. And it unleashed something dangerous in me, because basically what James March said is one way to get to the truth is to gather the data, but the other is just to make sense of your personal experience. I'm like, making sense of my personal experience is way more fun. And as a result of that, I wound up I wrote a whole section on OKRs and goal setting. I wrote a whole section on mission statements, and I wound up deleting those, which I think was a mistake. So I'm glad you got the data and made sure to get that stuff in your book.
I will say, the kinds of questions we asked. So, the way we understood if our managers were doing these things was we asked their employees if they saw these behaviors.
Yeah.
And the two kinds of questions we crafted around OKRs, especially, we didn't ask about purpose and vision specifically, but we did ask about OKRs and priorities. And the
Hmm.
OKR questions, one was, did your manager help you craft your quarterly OKRs? And the other was, did your manager allow you to help them craft the team's OKRs? They're a little different.
Hmm.
Right? One's about manager being present and helping you craft your goals, and another's
Hmm.
about the manager giving you a say in your team's goals, right?
Yeah.
So we asked both those questions, and then we asked question that was, my manager helps me prioritize my work,
Yeah.
including what not to identifying
What
what not
not
to
to
work on.
do. Yeah.
And so,
Remember the proactive forbearance list?
yeah, I do, I do exactly. And so, what's really, really interesting is ultimately we uh, substituted out those two OKR questions for just one that was a little broader about just my manager makes sure that we're clear about what is expected of me. I'm spacing
Hmm.
on the exact language.
Hmm.
And those first two questions, the OKR questions, probably had the weakest relationship with both engagement and results, which I thought was really, really interesting. But luckily, with the presence of the question, the
Hmm.
managers were still getting a score, and therefore were still likely to change their behavior to do those things. I
Hmm.
can't explain. I mean, something had to be at the bottom of the list, but it always fascinated me that while I understand how critical this underpinning is of being clear about what's expected, it wasn't correlating as strongly with coaching, for example, with your engagement.
With engagement. So
It
coach.
actually correlated with the results, but less with
Yeah.
engagement. Yeah.
Yeah. So coaching is really more important for engagement than direction. Is that correct?
Coaching, by our numbers,
Hmm.
I mean, the problem is, what are you coaching on
Yeah.
if you're not talking about what you expect in terms of behaviors and work products? I don't know what you're really coaching people on. So I think that's a little tricky. But yes, the two primary mechanisms for coaching, and then the requesting feedback were besides career conversations, at three most powerful
Yeah.
relationship with employee engagement.
So by coaching, behavior number one is soliciting feedback. Is that right? Or what do you? So talk about coaching.
Yeah, three kinds of coaching that had powerful, extremely powerful relationship with engagement. Number one was what you would call praise, what I call continue coaching,
Mm-hmm.
distant number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two was asking for feedback about what's to be better on this team. The whole, ask an open-ended question, shut your
Mm-hmm.
mouth, that whole thing. We could get into that. And then third was improvement coaching, which I found super interesting because you hear a lot of people say they want improvement coaching, and then when they get it, they hate it, right? It's just, there's no silver bullets here, right?
Yeah.
But it actually ended up, when managers did this well, which was
Mm-hmm.
usually about saying, I'm just trying to help you be more successful. That's
Mm-hmm.
all we're doing here. And
Mm-hmm.
we can fix some stuff. Wasn't that the most normal thing on earth? Then it really drove engagement. And that's how we taught it. That's how we taught
Yeah.
managers to do that, was make it always about helping people be more successful. That's
Yeah.
really it.
Yeah.
It's your job. Deliver an aligned result and enable the success of the people on your team. Every
Yeah.
manager in the world, exact same job description. End of story. So anyway, that had all three of those, super strong relationship with both engagement and results.
And so talk about praise. Like one story that one thing that you taught me that I talk about all the time is the book when you were coaching Little League. I love the book.
Yeah, I'm sure anyone who's listened, I bet we've got that story on tape 3 times. So
It's okay. It's worth repeating. There's some things that are worth repeating.
I'm going to let Amy tell me whether we should repeat this, right?
Oh,
Because
I think it's worth repeating, and the reason why I think it's really important, Russ, is because it really emphasizes the value of specific and sincere praise, and also on small, noticeable, actionable things. So
Yeah.
your example is in, if I'm not mistaken, Little League baseball. So I
Yeah.
want you to go into it. But
Right.
something that we've observed, even we had a recent challenge with the community, was the value of an exercise around praise, and really noticing small acts of praise, and building that into the culture. So please tell the story. And to be clear, it was capital T, capital B, but it was a book that you carried, and it was not When They Win You In.
Right, the book. It was a lab
Yep.
notebook. So
Yes.
I was impelled to go to a seminar by the Positive Coaching Alliance on a Saturday, which I didn't want to do. I had no idea what they were. I thought it's going to be a clown show. I'm an all-star manager. What could they possibly teach me? It's so arrogant. And it was awesome. This woman, she was the best facilitator. Content was so good. And my biggest takeaway was 5-1 praise criticism. I'm going to clear one idea before I go any further. A lot of times people hear this, they hear it's Little League, they hear Positive Coaching Alliance. I'm going to say two things about that. One is Positive Coaching Alliance works at pro, college, high school, and youth sports levels, not just Little League. Number two is 5-1, Positive Coach Alliance did not make up. They got it from John Gottman, who wrote the 7 Principles for Successful Marriage. 5-1 is one of the 7 principles. So this is adult stuff. Anyway, let me tell you the story. So I decide this is the kind of coach I want to be. My coaching partner, I coach with a bunch, exact same. We had a philosophy, which was development first, but winning matters. Because the kids want to win. And by the way, what standard are you using about whether you're doing a good job with these kids, developing them, if we don't at least look at on-field performance? So that's what we did. And so I started to keep notes. Every practice, every game, I wrote a book, what the kids did well. Literally, up on time to practice. You go into the book as on time for practice. You were late, we didn't say anything, because when an 8-year-old or 9-year-old is late to practice,
may not be their fault.
It's their parents' fault, right? And so, funny how that drove behavior. Little kids in their parents' shorts about getting to practice on time because they wanted to be called out. And how you stretched all the way through to fielding a ground ball, right? Center the ball in your stance, get your glove in the dirt, throwing hand over top of the ball, direct line to your throwing shoulder, back foot, front foot, fire to first. And so we would write this down. There's a little lull in energy. These are, I think, 9, 10, 11-year-old kids. We'd stop the practice and I'd hold the book up like Lion King and I'd sing the Lion King song, and everything. And we'd read from the book. And kids, they're just like, and they knew we were watching. This is a really important thing that matters for adults as well as children. When it's not that we don't like shit sandwiches, and I don't like co-locating praise and criticism in the same conversation. But if you have a habit of noticing what people are doing well relative to your standards, when it comes time for the improvement coaching, they trust that you do see what's happening in totality. It just becomes a tiny bit easier to absorb. So then the kids' behavior was always pristine. They hustled. They moved from station to station. They did the stuff right. And so they loved it. I would write, and then I'd do compilations on the website at night for the team. They couldn't wait to read it. Their parents loved it. It was all positive. What I learned from this, by far the most important thing that happened, and this is the most transferable over to the workplace, is by adopting that practice and using specific and sincere as the standard, it forced Drew and I to know and to be able to articulate cleanly what our standards even were.
So it went back to direction.
What is expected on this team?
Yeah.
Work products, sort of the technicalities of baseball, and behaviors like hustle or being on time, and so those two things, the idea that people know you're seeing what they're doing because you're saying it out loud, which makes it a little easier when the time comes for a little tougher conversation. And then forcing yourself as a leader to get very clear on what your team standards even are. We've all worked for the person who's overly positive. There's too many standards. Seems like they're making up a flavor of the month or flavor of the week. Versus getting really clear about what is expected on this team. Usually the behavioral standards, I like to look to our core values as a company and translate those to our behavioral standards. What is expected here? And how can I articulate that and put your specific thing you did in the context of our expectation, context of our standards? That is massively effective at nudging people toward behaving the way we want and the way they want, by the way, which is ostensibly behavior that leads to success, and doing work that is also leads to success.
Love it. So that's praise. What about soliciting feedback?
Yeah, I've been paying really close attention. I'm going to take this out of context. I want to go to the National Football League. I am pretty sure neither of you is a big fan.
You never know. Amy's more of a sports person.
I used to be a big fan. I am aware, but I don't know if my football card stopped around the late 70s.
So I'm from Philadelphia. I'm a huge Philadelphia Eagles fan. They have a head coach named Nick Sirianni. He got hired a few years ago. I'll tell you a story about this season that I think is fascinating with respect to soliciting feedback from your team. So the Eagles got out of the gate this year. They have the head coach stayed. The context is the last 7 games last year. They were 10-1, 10 wins, 1 loss. And then the last 7 games they went 1-6. Absolute collapse. Got destroyed and embarrassed in the first round of the playoffs. A lot of people thought Nick was going to lose his job. Head coach was going to lose his job. He didn't. The owner is very inclined never to blame talent. Usually blames the manager, the coach. Gave Nick one last shot. Most of us surmise it was, you got to get back to the playoffs or else you're done. So here come the Eagles. They get out to a slow start. They're 2-2 after 4 games. And one of the 2 games they lost, they really should have won. And they go into their bye week. So every NFL team at different intervals, they get a week off where they don't have to play a game. And the Eagles, by the way, just to cut to the chase, they just as of yesterday have won their 10th game in a row after that bye week. They are now 12-2. So they were 2-2 after the bye week. Reporter says, Nick, at some point, it's a trend, right? It's long before 10 wins in a row. It's 6 wins. Nick, what happened in the bye week?
Yeah.
He said, well, here's what happened. Organizationally, we like to throw the ball more. The owner wants to. The offensive coordinator, the person who owns the offense wants to throw the ball more. He said, but the offensive line, the least sexy, least famous people, the big giant guys who just block and wrestle every play, went in, shut the door with the head coach, the 5 of them, and said, we need to pass the ball less. We need to run the ball more. We've got this incredible guy who can run the ball. And he's by the way, might set the single season record for running yards. Like he's close. And then the head coach said, okay. And then he did the right diligence. He went and talked to that person, made a decision. We're going to shift our emphasis to running the ball more.
So he didn't solicit feedback, but he got some.
He's a solicit. He did solicit it.
Okay.
I told it like he just got it.
Yeah.
But even if that were the case, he listened to it. He absorbed it.
Yeah.
He took action on it. And then he had to go sell this, by the way, to the quarterback who, guess what, wants to throw the ball, to the guy who owns the offense who, guess what, wants to throw the ball, and to the wide receivers who they have 2 of the best who want to catch the ball, who therefore want it to be thrown. He has to go sell this. And they came out and they started running the ball. They run it better than anybody in the NFL. This is not me just being a fan. It's
a fact.
Mathematically,
you have data.
Yeah. And they're on a 10-game win streak. That 10-game win streak required this head coach to go humbly and seek input from his team. He got it from the very large, scary men, very directly. He did the right thing in digesting it. You know, doing what your team says isn't the right answer, but digesting it and following up is. And he did. It ended up being the right answer. And now this team's on a 10-game win streak. All this guy did was listen to his people.
Yeah.
It's their team too. Yeah. They are closest to the facts. They are the ones on the ground who could see them winning every block that would lead to bigger run plays. They are the ones that know the answers. His job's to assimilate that into a coherent plan each week. All he did was go listen to his team. And I'm sorry if it's good enough for the NFL, where everything is measurable. You're totally scrutinized every week by your fans, by your ownership, by your peers who are studying your game film, by the media. You know, this stuff has to cut the mustard in that context. And I'm happy to report in this very masculine, tough testosterone environment that it turns out just listening to your friggin' team really moves the needle.
Really matters.
Yeah. So I love that example.
I love that. It's great. It's great.
Yeah.
It's
their
great
team too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
my team. Oh, my team. It's my team.
Yeah. Or I lead. Yeah, I lead. Remember, I was always proud of myself, but other people found it annoying. I would always say I work for the AdSense team.
Yeah.
And when
we knew you meant it. We knew you meant it. A lot of people use those as cliches, right?
I know.
And they're annoying when people, so you don't always know. But it's
hard. Either way, you sound annoying. You sound annoying if you say, I lead the team. And you also sound annoying if you say, I work for the team. What are you supposed to say?
Just do a lot of we and us stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, without any acknowledgement of the reporting relationship that, trust me, no one needs reminding of.
Yes, that's the truth.
That's why it's so important. Totally different topic. That's why it's so important to relentlessly disempower yourself with your team, because what never leaves is the actual power.
Yeah.
And so to get them to tell you the truth requires you to constantly disempower yourself in their eyes.
To lay your power down.
Yeah,
over
lay
and
it down.
lay
And
it
by the
down.
way, kick it aside and then
Yeah.
and then kick it more and put it in the closet and then throw it in the trash. And because the power never actually leaves the relationship.
Yeah, you gotta really work hard to lay it down. Totally true. Which is why giving criticism as a boss is tricky. You want to make sure that you do it in the right way. All right. So last but not least is career conversations. And we'll talk about that in a whole other episode, right?
Cool. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So we had direction, we had coaching. We're going to follow up on the next episode around career. And, Russ, one of the things that we love to do at the end of our episodes is to.
I think this is Russ's original idea.
Is this your original
radical
idea?
Candor checklist.
The
It's
checklist?
Russ's idea. Yeah.
Oh, probably Elise's idea.
Probably
but-
Elise's idea.
Yeah,
But this is something from the OG podcast. So we will give some public praise to you, Russ, and to Elise, if you're listening.
Lockhart, yes.
Elise Lockhart. So now it's time for our Radical Candor checklist, tips to start putting radical candor into practice.
Tip number 1, Russ, take it away.
So tip number 1, I'm going to do tip number 1. Set clear direction by aligning your team with long-term purpose and vision. Defining measurable goals for each quarter is usually the right cadence, and practicing ruthless prioritization to focus on what truly matters each day and each week. If someone wanted to know one thing to do along these lines, what I would start doing next week is holding a stand-up meeting. If you don't know what a stand-up meeting is, Google search will get you that answer. No more than a half hour, only focused on what are the things we are going to get done this week in support of our quarterly goals. That's tip number 1.
All right. Tip number 2, coach effectively by giving specific and sincere praise. Praise like your life depends on it. So it's the goal of this is to let people know what good looks like. You also need to solicit feedback from your team to make sure that you are building trust, that you know what's really happening, what really is not happening that should happen. And last but not least, you want to give kind and clear criticism to help people improve.
Tip number 3, career. This is the third of Russ's big 3. So imagine a gravity assist slingshot and hold that in your mind. So it's really using a lot of gravity because Russ is going to be back to explain what that all means and how the heck it relates to your career development. We'll get into all the deets on career conversations.
Take care, and excited to be back with you all next week.
Thanks for joining us. Our podcast features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff, is produced by our Director of Content, Brandy Neal, and hosted by me, Amy Sandler. Music is by Cliff Goldmacher. Go ahead and follow us on Twitter at Candor and find us online at radicalcandor.com.